here today. So Wendy invited me along to share with you a little bit of my own lived experience, and then to be able to, I guess, just provide what insights I can for you in the areas of counselling and community services and what have you. So I can speak to you from experience with regards to caring for somebody who's been in that suicidal space for a number of years, and also as someone who is bereaved through suicide. So I'll probably chat for 15 minutes or so, and then really we'll just open the floor up to you, and you can ask me anything you like. If there's anything that I'm uncomfortable in answering, I'll tell you. Okay, so please don't be shy about what you ask, because I'd rather you ask and us have an open discussion. That would be great. So I'm going to share with you something today that I actually haven't shared with anyone else before. So you're special. And this is my life, this is my lived experience. So I may falter a little bit, but that's okay as well. I'm actually fine. I'm going to first of all read to you something that was written, and then we'll go from there. So, he came into our lives as a speeding comet, radiating waves of brilliant light. Every moment we had with him was made special by his intensity and illuminance washing over us. He has taken his brilliant light out of our vision to find his peace, more friends, and adventures in another place. We who are left behind with just sunlight will forever miss his very special illumination. These are the words of the Father, penned with such painstaking focus because they had to be perfect. They were penned at a time when breathing itself was an effort, and they were penned at a time when he grieved the loss of his son, who had taken his own life. There is so much story in this photograph. There is pain and disbelief. There is grief that physically hurts. There's frustration. There's courage and acceptance, and there's resilience. There are 3 generations represented in this photograph as well, and on this plaque. It speaks of my brother, of my parents, my family, my kids, and it speaks of me. It speaks of my brother through the robustness and the pride of its construction. The nickname Fish was given to my brother when he was at school, and it was carried through right throughout his career with friends and family, peers, superiors. The RAAF reference speaks of his passion. It was his lifelong dream. From when he was this big, all he ever wanted to do was fly. He was the youngest post-war fighter pilot in Australia. He went on to be a fighter combat instructor, and then finally onto an international flying career. My brother Mark was intelligent, he was fun, he was loved, he was loving, he was larger than life. It speaks of my parents. It speaks of my mother who, unfaltering, she goes to his grave every week. And she's the only one in the family who can. She's the only one in the family who has the strength to do so. And I am eternally grateful that she can. She has that sense of loyalty to her son. My father's beautiful words, his internalisation of his grief, and yet his capacity to, I guess, give myself words of acceptance and love. His early onset of dementia, I truly believe, has been brought about by the years of stress that the family went through in trying to save my brother, and in the years that followed after his death. It speaks of my family as well, Roses in the Ocean. My children were 3 and 5 when Mark took his own life. And all they knew was that Uncle Mark was sad and then he died. It was very important for us to somehow get a message across to those beautiful little minds that just because you were sad, it didn't mean that you would die. And so we took them to his favourite beach, placed Roses in the Ocean, and tried to explain to them that sometimes you can feel really upset and life can be turbulent like the waves are crashing on the rocks, but further out it's nice and calm. And so we place these roses in the ocean, and you need to reach out and ask for help if you're feeling like that. Similarly, tried to say to them, if you see your friends who are feeling like that, you need to reach out to them as well. It was a very simplistic way of us trying to make sense of something for little kids. This plaque also speaks about me. I'm represented on this plaque on the day of my brother's death. It's a date that I share with him. It's my birthday. It's a date that guilt still lingers around, despite all logical and rational thought. It is the reason I wasn't where he was on that weekend. So we were linked very, very closely in life, right throughout our lives, very close. In the last 3 years, incredibly close, as I was the person who was trying to support him and keep him alive. And so we are linked in death as well. It speaks of my husband. He doesn't visit this grave, but he chooses to honour my brother with his own memories and in supporting the family that he left behind. And it speaks of my kids, once again, with the roses in the ocean, but just, I have a daughter who can't go here. I have a son who can. I have kids who have watched me live on the knife edge, trying to keep my brother alive. They've watched me grieve, and they're very watchful still. And I do wonder, as a mum, you wonder what impact has this had on them and what impact is it going to have on them as they grow. And the questions change. Even now, 5 minutes ago, are you going to talk to them about what you say to kids? You know, how do you talk to kids about suicide? What do you say? And as they get older, they ask different questions. So we try and answer them at an age-appropriate level. But you do wonder. It impacts generations. But it also speaks of hope, because there was no silver lining. There isn't, as far as I'm concerned. When a suicide happens, there is no silver lining. But I had to create one, and that's where Roses in the Ocean came about. And so it is very much my passion and my driver now. And it's how I make some sense and something come out of a terrible situation, and at least we can help save other people's lives. In Australia, we lose 7 people a day. It's the equivalent of a commercial 737 crashing in Australia every month. That's how many people we lose. Imagine the number of families that is that has this ripple effect on them. We have 60,000 suicide attempts in the country every year. So the statistics are staggering, and they're tragic. What we know also, though, is that half of the suicides in Australia are not related to previously diagnosed mental illness. And so there's this perception in the community that if you don't have a mental illness, then you're actually not at risk. And it's just not the case. And whilst this probably sounds strange me saying this, but I actually find that quite exciting. It's fairly new research. It's Australian Institute of Suicide Research and Prevention, ASRAP, which is based here. They're one of only 3 research centres that's linked with World Health Organisation. It was 2010 that this information came. And so to me it's exciting because it means that we have the potential to protect ourselves. Because if people are aware that they are actually at risk, suicide's so complex, it does not discriminate. You don't have to have a mental illness to be at risk. But what that means is that if everyone realises that, everyone might actually sit up and pay attention about what they can do to protect themselves and protect their loved ones and their colleagues and their family. Because there are things that you can do, and suicide is mostly preventable. I'd love to have a chat to you a little bit about the myths around suicide. And if you have any others, please share them with the group as well. But one of the things that we find so many people are really believe that if you ask someone who is actually suicidal, if you directly ask them, are you thinking of suicide? Are you thinking of taking your life? That it's actually going to put the thought into their minds. But we now know that that's not the case. And so from all the people that you talk to who have made an attempt at suicide, they say to you it's actually an enormous relief to have somebody ask that question, because it opens the door for them to actually talk. They say it feels like this massive weight is lifted off their shoulders, that someone's actually noticed enough that they're struggling to be able to open that conversation up. A person who's suicidal wants to die. In the work that I do with Roses in the Ocean, we work a lot with lived experience people. We are training people with lived experience how to tell their stories, how to speak publicly. And I've not yet had one person who's made an attempt on their life tell me that they actually wanted to die. What they tell us is that they wanted the pain to end, or they thought their loved ones would be better off. So when somebody actually makes an attempt, often you'll hear, oh, they're just attention seeking. If someone's actually going to that length, they're in pain and they need help. It is a call for help. And there's not one suicide attempt that should be dismissed as somebody just attention seeking. And if it is, it's literally a call for help. So it needs to be taken very, very seriously. In terms of, there's a myth there, it's best to leave someone alone who's lost a loved one to suicide. It doesn't matter what you say. You can't actually say something wrong. Just say something. I had a very fortunate experience, because when Mark died, we actually had family and friends just went like this. We did not experience the stigma that a lot of other people have and do all the time. We were very fortunate, but I've certainly heard stories quite the opposite. I even had one lady who was a mother at the school where the kids were, and it took her a year, but literally a year later she came to me and we were at a swimming lesson or something, and she said, I just have to say to you how sorry I am to hear about your brother. I've been wanting to talk to you for a year, but every time I looked at you, you just looked so upset that I just couldn't bring myself to say something, but I've been thinking of you. That took a lot of courage, to a year past the date, to actually come up and acknowledge. And I think it's that, it's not an acknowledgement that you're looking for sympathy, but it's just an acknowledgement that you understand that they're hurting and that you're there to support. And in terms of helping somebody who's being bereaved, it can be as simple as turning up with a meal, helping to pick kids up, sitting there in silence, sitting there and listening. Has anyone else, have you heard of other things about suicide that you're not sure whether it's right or wrong that you'd like to ask?
I've heard people say over the years that suicide is selfish, which I completely disagree with. I feel it's a myth. I feel that if you're in such pain that you lead to suicide, it can't be a selfish act. It's a way of trying to manage something that you don't know how to manage. So I regard it as a myth. I don't know if everyone else would agree.
I certainly agree with you. I've definitely had a number of people particularly say to me, aren't you angry? Aren't you angry at your brother for killing himself on your birthday? I actually can't be angry. I'm angry that he's not here, that my kids don't have an uncle. I get pretty cross sometimes that I have a father with a dementia and split parents, and I'm here trying to manage them on my own. I get annoyed, but I'm not angry with him for the decision he made. I guess I'm angry at life sometimes. But when you see someone who's in that amount of pain, I actually can't blame him for what he did. I wish he hadn't. because he couldn't see that we could, you know, there's always another moment, there's always another day, and eventually you'll find something that works for you. But I'm like you, I think it takes an enormous amount of courage to end your life. I really don't believe most people want that I really don't believe people want to die. Someone said something to me the other day, people who want to go to heaven don't want to die. So yes. No, I don't think he's selfish. I just hurt him. Really hurt him. Sorry, now I'm a little bit jumping all over the place. For those of you who are students and studying to be counsellors and community service workers and what have you, I just, try to think of the sorts of people that you may be assisting in your work and what have you, and obviously those of you that are actually working as part of Australis, no doubt you do come in contact either with students yourselves who are struggling through life, or just life throws them a curveball and you're needing to be in to support them. So I just sort of thought it might be useful to look at the different groups of people that you may come across, and a few suggestions from my own experience in terms of what you may or may not like to be able to say or do. In terms of someone who's caring for a suicidal person, I'll just grab my notes so I don't sort of forget things, but I think one of the most important messages that you can give someone who's caring for someone who is suicidal is that self-care. It's exhausting. It is absolutely exhausting looking after someone that you love, that you don't know if they're going to be there the next day. And when that's over a prolonged period of time, it really does affect every aspect of their own lives. We were very fortunate in the sense that my husband kind of works in this brain science and counselling space and coaching space, and he tried to take charge of our family to a certain degree. So occasionally we would go and we would do a bushwalk together or a picnic, and we would make a rule: no one talks about Mark for 3 hours, because you need to short circuit it and have a break. It takes an enormous physical toll on you to be at that level of stress with that cortisol and adrenaline running through your body. So to be encouraging people to really think about a self-care plan in terms of who can they talk to as a release, what is something that they can do that gives them pleasure, that takes them away from this crazy world that they're living on, this roller coaster with this person that they're trying to support. Because ultimately, when you run out of steam, you don't have it for them. I would take 65, 70 text messages a night sometimes from my brother, and you'd be up all night trying to keep him safe, and then you'd wake up to 2 young kids and have to get up and get going again. So it is really taxing. So to be able to try and look after themselves is really critical. Help them find help. This is one of the biggest reasons that Rose in the Ocean came to be, because we were a very well-resourced, intelligent family. And whilst, yes, we had a split family, we're still very cohesive. And we were all working hard to try and find the right help, and we still couldn't find it. So if there's any way that you can, in your positions, be knowledgeable, take the time and make the effort to find out some good help sources and pathways that you can then pass on. Because when you're in that space, it's really hard to sit at the internet and try and find assistance. I don't know how many, at least 20 psychologists I interviewed over the phone in Sydney trying to find somewhere for him that might be the right person. Because they don't have the energy to go from one to the other, to the other, to the other. Every time they see someone new, they're going to tell their story again. And so if you can be a bit of a resource for assistance, that's really useful as well. The other really big thing was, and this was really tricky because my husband actually tried to do this with me when we got to a point where we thought it's almost a matter of when, not if. He tried to prepare me for the possibility that Mark would end his life. And that's incredibly confronting. And yet I know why he was trying to do it, because I guess he was terrified of what was going to happen if it did and what was going to happen to me. But just tried to get me to just think about the possibility that I wasn't going to be able to save him, and trying to prepare me for the fact that it was not going to be my fault. Because you speak to anyone who's bereaved and they carry guilt. and it won't be legitimate, but you carry it. And you can have all the rational and logical thoughts. You can sit in front of a counsellor for as long as you like being told it's not your fault, but there is a little bit in you that will always think, if only I was there, if only I'd said this. And so trying to prepare people for that, I think is useful from my perspective anyway. I think it's a useful thing to keep in mind. In terms of when you're actually bereaved, I think one of the biggest things that helped me, I wasn't someone who could go to a support group, and the only counsellor I went to was actually someone that my brother had, the only one that my brother had actually liked or respected. And I really went to him because there was a connection and I was looking for answers of what was going on. But the best thing he said to me was, you've been living this space for years. You cannot expect your grief to be over quickly. And not that I expected it to be over quickly, but when you're 3 years down the track and you're still bursting into tears when you walk down a supermarket aisle, when there's no reason, when it just hits you and it takes your breath away. But to know that that's normal actually makes you feel better. And to know that there are other people do that. So everyone will look for different things. I somehow got on some newsletter, so I used to read that from cover to cover. Didn't want to go to a support group, but if I could read that other people felt the same way or had experienced the same things, that made me feel a bit more normal. And I think knowing that I was never going to get over the suicide of my brother and accepting that I would never get over it, but accepting that I would learn to live with it was something that's also helped me. Because you're a different person when you come out the other end. And I'm very thankful that my husband has stuck by me, because I am different to the person that he married. It does change you. But accepting that that's the case, I think, is part of the journey of being bereaved and getting to a spot where you can stand up here and chat about it and not be a mess, I suppose. I guess that message is that it's everyone takes their own time, and there are people who come to our Speakers Bureau programs. I ran one just this weekend with a group of people from regional and rural Queensland, and we have people there who lost children 15, 20 years ago, and others who lost them 6 months ago. And some people are ready at 6 months to talk and to do something, and others 20 years down the track. It's all very different. It's all unique. In terms of dealing with people who are actually suicidal, I've thankfully never been in that place. It's interesting to know that for people who have lost someone to suicide, they themselves are at an 8 times higher risk of suiciding in the first 12 months. So be very, very vigilant. If someone comes to you and they're bereaved, you really need to be very watchful of them and the others in that inner circle, because that risk is very, very much heightened. But from the people that I have had the privilege of working with and meeting who have been in that space, once again, it is very much ask them directly if they are thinking of harming themselves, and if they are, then you need to stay with them until you get their support network in place. It's not necessarily your job to save them, but it is your job to sit with them until you can find the other support that they need. And I guess it's just listening with an open heart and an open mind and not judging them. And the other thing too is that so often suicide, as I mentioned before, is thought that it's a mental illness, and it's not always the case. And it can be a matter of really trying to find out what are the actual issues. Is it that they need relationship help? Is it that they need financial help? Is it that they need parenting help? What is the cause? What is the social context that's sitting around this person feeling like they can't cope anymore? And so to have somebody who can actually have a discussion with them and try and find what other assistance might be needed as part of that support team to help them get from where they are to a point where they feel like they can cope and go on to live a fulfilling life. So they're the sorts of things that I hear from listening and talking and working with people who have been in that space. The only other thing, if I get through here, I'm probably telling you things you already know, and my apologies if I am, but it is a really important aspect. This guide to safe language has been put together by Mindframe, who, are you familiar with Mindframe? No? Okay, so Mindframe provide the guidelines for the discussion and reporting of suicide in the media, and Australia and Austria are the two leading countries in the world in terms of having this framework around safe language, and but even more so lead the way in the fact of how well they've actually implemented and infiltrated into media circles. So if you recall, it's only been 2 years, I think, October 2 years ago, that the media were allowed to start reporting about suicide, but it's very specific. We do not mention method of death, and we do not mention image-provoking details of circumstance. There's nothing to be gained by knowing how somebody died. It's irrelevant. And that there is a concern that talking about the method of death can actually really trigger other people. It's certainly for bereaved people. It is really important to watch the language that you're using, because you just don't know who's in the audience or who's in the group of people that you're talking to. You don't know what their experience is. And you can just say one word and it can trigger something and a reaction in them that really hurts. So in terms of language, this is the most difficult one, the committed suicide, because for years and years and years, that's the language we've used, because it used to be a crime. It's not a crime anymore. I mean, it never was, but legally it's not a crime anymore. And the word committed actually really upsets a lot of people who have lost someone to suicide. They find it really stigmatising. And when you talk about stigma, there's a wonderful man, Nick Eales, who is a lived experience. He's a suicide attempt survivor, and he spoke at the last Suicide Prevention Australia conference specifically around stigma. And his call to action is, can we please stop using this word stigma? Let's call it what it is, and it's fear and discrimination and judgment. So it's about breaking that down so that people are more likely to put their hands up and ask for help. So instead of committed suicide, it's more died by suicide or completed suicide. We rather use ended his or her life, took his or her life. So it's just important to sort of just start to try and use that more appropriate language when you're discussing suicide. And in terms of key messages, knowing that most suicides are preventable. Everyone actually has the ability to play an active role in suicide prevention. It really is as simple as looking after yourself, staying physically active, having meaningful connections. Sense of identity and purpose are critical. It's incredible how many people, when you say, can you tell me about yourself, they'll tell you what they do. So many of us link our identity to our occupation, instead of actually spending time on working on who are we as a person. Am I comfortable in my skin? If I get made redundant tomorrow, how am I going to feel about that? My brother didn't have any diagnosed mental health condition. What happened to him was he was in a high stress work environment. He broke off an engagement and 2 grandmothers died all in the space of 10 weeks. And it just was too much. So he went to a doctor and said, I'm not coping, something's not right. If that doctor had said to my brother, here, take 3 weeks off, take 4 weeks off, go home, see a counsellor, have a chat, surround yourself with your family, I say to you now, I think he'd still be alive. What happened, he was given an antidepressant. That meant he couldn't fly, obviously. He can't be being treated for that and have 400 people in the back of a jumbo. So when you can't fly, for someone who left school, went straight into the RAF and flew fighters and then commercial jets. So he'd flown since the age of 15 and he'd flown with the RAF since 17. So he's at home, he's out of uniform, he can't fly. So his sense of identity is robbed. Purpose? had income protection, earning great money still, didn't need to work, couldn't work, otherwise the income protection wouldn't pay. So the identity's gone, the purpose is gone, and he's living on the Sunshine Coast and we're all in Brisbane. So you've got some really critical stuff that's just gone, that's been stripped away from someone. And then you couple that up with a psychiatrist who believes that you throw medication after medication after medication at someone until you're on a complete cocktail of drugs. And that just starts you in a spiral that we literally couldn't pull him out of. So his suicide was completely, in my mind, preventable, had that right at the front been treated differently. If only I'd known then what I know now, but at least now I can tell other people. Do not take the first set of advice you get. If you intuitively don't think it's right, go looking for something else. And you can put those protective factors in. So when we look back, very easy to connect the dots, looking backwards. We look back now and I think, you know what? His identity was completely rolled up into being a pilot. He was embarrassed not to be able to fly. He used to tell people there's something wrong with his eyes. So that sense of identity in my brother was not strong. And then you lose your sense of purpose. So these are things that we can be teaching kids and we can start working on ourselves. I do a lot of transition career coaching as well, with another hat on. And it's amazing how difficult people find it to talk about themselves and talk about their strengths and what they're good at. Because we don't take the time. But they're the sorts of things that you can be doing so that when life does throw you the curveball, because it will, because that's life, you need that toolkit that's already there and that build that resilience.
Well, thank you, Bronwen. And Georgina has a little something from...
Yes, we did a bit of a fundraiser in Australis College, just to basically say thank you for coming in and to go towards the cause. We raised $200.
Thank you, everyone, so very, very much. This goes, everything that Roses in the Ocean earns goes directly back into suicide prevention. Every single one of us who works in it is a complete volunteer. So this will either go into community events that will happen during next year where we bring communities and service providers together so that the locals can find the help in their local area, or go towards bringing speakers together that we can train them so they can go and talk in their communities just like we have today, just to try and raise some awareness and education and what have you. So thank you very, very much. It's really appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please stay.